wounded. He's seeing the dust rising from the enemy charge.
He's weighing the external battle against the internal battle. The external battle is the enemy army. The internal battle is the fight for his soul. He has to decide if he is a king who fights or a king who is true.
And then he acts. He doesn't shout, he doesn't argue, he doesn't try to negotiate. Slowly, he places his sword on the ground.
He chooses the word.
He surrenders the weapon. The source says the army stands in disbelief. And I have to say, if I'm reading this without knowing the ending, I'm thinking he's lost his mind.
Yeah.
He is handing the keys to the enemy.
It defies all political and military logic. It's an act of supreme adherence to principle over survival. He decides that a king without truth is not a king worth having, or maybe that a kingdom saved by a lie is already lost. He's accepting the death of his ambition, the death of his rule, and potentially the death of his body, just to keep that metaphysical line unbroken.
Now, in the story, and this is where the folktale element kicks in, this is where we get the resolution. As soon as the sword hits the ground, the Brahmin reveals his true form. He isn't just a wanderer, he is a divine messenger.
A deus ex machina. Literally, the test is concluded.
Yes. The text says that because the king chose truth over fear, the gods intervene. The enemy army retreats without reason. Maybe they were spooked, maybe divine wind. The text is vague, but the kingdom is spared.
Now, I want to be careful here. It's easy for us to look at the divine intervention and say, oh, well, it all worked out because of magic. It feels like a cheat code. Don't worry about being irresponsible. God will fix it. But that misses the point of the allegory. The divine intervention is the narrative reward, but the lesson is in the decision the king made before he knew he would be saved.
That's a massive point.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't drop the sword because he knew a god would save him. He dropped the sword thinking he was losing everything. He thought he was walking into a massacre.
Exactly. He accepted the loss. He accepted the destruction of his status and his realm to preserve his truth. If he had known he would be saved, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would just be a transaction. The virtue lies in the risk. The source material has this powerful line at the end. It says the king picked up his sword again, but that day he did not win a battle. He won over himself.
He won over himself. That brings us to the analysis part of this deep dive. The source asks a really reflective question. When circumstances change, do our promises change too?
In our modern world, the answer is often yes. We see this all the time. Contracts are renegotiated, politicians pivot. We have force majeure clauses in legal documents. We rationalize breaking our word because the situation has evolved. I can't help you move today because it's raining, or I can't fund this project because interest rates went up.
Right, we justify it. We look at the data and say, well, obviously the promise is null and void now.
But this story argues for a form of sovereign integrity that is immune to circumstance. It suggests that true integrity is defined strictly by what happens when the cost is unbearable. If your values shift when the pressure mounts, they aren't values, they're hobbies. They are preferences.
That hits hard. If your values shift when the pressure mounts, they aren't values. It also mentioned this idea that sometimes the real battlefield is not outside, it is within.
That connects back to the definition of leadership. We often think of leadership as managing external forces, markets, armies, voters. But the source is arguing that the primary struggle of leadership is internal consistency. It's the discipline to remain the same person in the storm as you were in the calm. The king had to conquer his own fear of losing. That was a harder fight than swinging a sword at a soldier.
The outline of the source material lists a few key lessons. One is, think before making promises, which honestly is the practical takeaway here. Maybe don't tell a mysterious stranger, ask anything unless you really mean anything.
Yes, that is the practical wisdom. Limiting the scope of your commitments is wise. But the deeper lesson listed is integrity often carries a cost. We like to tell ourselves that doing the right thing will always lead to success. You know, honesty is the best policy. But this story reminds us that sometimes honesty is the expensive policy. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing the battle.
And that's what makes it so uncomfortable. We want to believe that if we are good, we will win. But this story says you have to be willing to lose. That's the moral courage the source talks about.
Moral courage is rarer than physical courage. There were thousands of men on that battlefield willing to die fighting the enemy. That is physical courage. They were brave. But there was only one man willing to let his reputation and his life's work be destroyed to keep a promise. That is moral courage. It is the ability to face shame or defeat or misunderstanding rather than compromise who you are.
It's interesting to think about how this applies to the listener. We probably aren't kings of ancient realms, and hopefully we aren't being tested by divine messengers in a war. But we all have those moments where we gave our word and then the situation got complicated.
We do. Think about a relationship. You promise to be there in sickness and in health. That is easy to say at the wedding when everyone looks great. It is much harder to keep when the sickness actually comes, when the finances crumble, when the battlefield of life gets chaotic. That is when the Brahmin shows up.
Or in business, you promise a client a delivery date. Then your supplier quits, your software crashes, and it's going to cost you double to meet that date.
Yeah.
Do you take the loss to keep the word? Or do you send the email saying, due to unforeseen circumstances?
Exactly. And the question this deep dive leaves us with is about our own thresholds. We all have a price. We all have a point where we say, okay, I promise, but this is too much. The king in this story didn't have a price. Or rather, he decided that his word was priceless.
It really forces you to examine your own boundaries. I want to throw some of the provocative questions from our source material out there for everyone listening.
Please.
If you were the king, be honest with yourself. Would you have sacrificed the kingdom for a promise?
It's a brutal question. If you say yes, you're noble, but you might be seen as a reckless leader who abandoned your people. If you say no, you're practical, you're smart, but you're a liar.
Exactly. At what point does responsibility outweigh personal honor? Is there a point where keeping your word is actually the wrong thing to do because it hurts too many other people?
That is the tension. And I think the story lands on the side of the absolute because it views the king's word not just as personal honor, but as the cosmic glue holding the universe together. If the king lies, the order of the world collapses. So in a way, by saving his word, he was saving the kingdom. Even if it didn't look like it in that moment, he was preserving the moral structure of his society.
That connects to the final thought in our source. The greatest victories are internal. The enemy army retreating was just a side effect. The real event was the king conquering his own fear and his own instinct for self-preservation.
Precisely. The external world is always going to be chaotic. There will always be wars, crises, and unexpected demands. We can't control the Brahmin appearing on the battlefield. We cannot control the enemy advancing. The only thing we have absolute sovereign control over is our own will, our decision to pick up the sword or lay it down.
Values must remain steady in unstable times. That's the quote I'm stuck on. It's easy to have values when they're free. It's hard when you have to pay for them.
And perhaps that is the definition of a true leader. A leader is found in those moments when no one else understands their decision. When the army is staring in disbelief and the logic of the world says fight, but the logic of the soul says yield, that is where character is forged.
It's a powerful place to leave it. The idea that every word we speak carries weight, and that the test often comes when we least expect it.
Indeed. It forces us to ask, is my word a contract with convenience or a contract with truth?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Kathasaritsagara. It's a story about a king, but really it's a story about the weight of the words we speak.
And the promises we keep.
We'll leave you with that thought. Until next time.